Socialists of Smith County, Texas, 1900 to 1917. This program was first presented to the Smith County Historical Society on November 1st, 2011. Agriculture has always been, as they say, a hard row to hoe, but beginning in the 1890s and continuing on until World War I, farming was so difficult that it had some people in Smith County considering a radically different way of organizing their economy and government: socialism. When James Wilkins asked me last year if I had ever heard of socialist encampments in Tyler, my first reaction was, no way, it has always been Tyler the conservative, right? But it turns out that when people are desperate, they will consider almost any option. Events leading up to the Panic of 1893, caused largely by the overbuilding of railroads, you could call it a railroad bubble, resulted in bank failures, including Bonner & Bonner, City National, and First National banks here in Tyler. This was compounded by a severe drought, and thousands of small farm owners across the South, including East Texas, lost their farms and became tenant farmers. As the economy eventually improved, these farmers were supposed to have good crop years, and they were supposed to be able to buy back their farms. Instead, in Texas in 1880, 38% of the farmers were tenants. In 1890, 42%, and in 1900, 53%, with the number increasing. According to a 1914 Tyler Courier-Times article, 72% of the farms in Smith County were either mortgaged or operated by tenants. Of the tenants, 92% were on a share basis, not cash rental. On the other hand, 41 farms in the county contain more than 500 acres each. 20,700 persons in the county were directly dependent on tenant farmers and mortgaged farm home owners for a living. According to a 1915 federal commission which sent investigators to Texas to study the growing problem of landless farmers, this is how the system worked. Cash-poor landowners often needed to buy seed, feed, food, and clothing for the year. Some went to banks, but in Smith County, most went to credit merchants like Waddell, Caldwell, Hughes, and Patterson, who sold them what they needed in the spring on short-term credit. However, they charged these farmers 57.1% more for these goods than they would had they bought them in cash. The credit merchant would also put stipulations on the crop. It should be all or nearly all cotton, not corn or other food or feed crops. So the farmer bought the supplies there and planted the cotton. Only at the harvest, the credit merchant could also control the price of the cotton to a certain extent. If the crop year was bad, the farmer went into debt and his farm might be foreclosed upon. The credit merchant accumulated land or sold it to an investor or landlord. The farmer would become a tenant and begin paying 1/3 of his crop, perhaps plus a bonus, to the landlord according to the deal. If the farmer's crop year was good, the credit merchant might convince him to buy a new buggy, and then he was back in debt again. By 1915, some of the tenants were committed to revolving 3-year loans, and they had almost no hope of escape other than just walking off the farm, and many did. Across Texas, almost 60% of tenant farmers moved every year. There was no incentive for property improvement. That just raised the price of the land. The farmers blamed the credit system, and the credit merchants called the farmers ignorant and shiftless. By 1910, they would also be calling many of them socialists. The Texas Socialist Party built on the foundation of the old Populist, or People's Party, which had urged reforms based on the abandonment of the gold standard to increase the supply of currency, which they thought would bring prosperity. As that party faded, other groups arose to speak for the tenant farmers, including the Farmers Alliance and the Farmers Union. The Socialist Labor Party ran their first candidate for governor in 1898. By 1900, the first year that I track, they are already receiving votes in Smith County. Not many, but keep an eye on Pleasant Grove with almost 8% socialist vote. That's roughly the New Chapel Hill area between Bascom and Sharon Baptist Church, according to the 1900 school district maps. National-level socialists were always squabbling about theory and power, and by 1901, the Socialist Party of America came out on top. J.A. Wayland of the socialist newspaper, The Appeal to Reason in Kansas, sent a party organizer to Texas in early 1904. Soon, Comrade Pollitt of Swan, Comrade Key of Bullard, and Comrade Smith of Overton were writing in to the paper. The socialists adapted the idea of the old populist encampment, which in turn was based on the religious camp meeting. Farmers would gather in August to hear state and national speakers, visit, and have fun. The granddaddy of all socialist encampments was at Grand Saline. The first one, in 1904, drew 4,000 to 6,000 people, and it would continue to grow. Resolutions adopted there call for the overthrow of the capitalist system and the substitution, therefore, of the cooperative commonwealth. By that fall, Tyler was beginning to establish its own socialist leadership. Nat B. Hunt, a traveling salesman based here, was nominated for comptroller of the state of Texas. In the 1904 election, more county precincts were recording socialist votes, including Pleasant Grove's almost 30%. The next year, W.J. Bell, a Tyler piano tuner, was elected state party secretary, and for the next few years, all Texas news that was reported to the Appeal to Reason came from Tyler. In 1906, the Tyler Daily Courier announced, "Socialists put out a ticket is a list of good men, well known and personally popular in the county, expected to poll a vote in November." At their convention on East Irwin, Nat Hunt was elected chairman of the meeting. W.J. Bell was secretary, and they selected a full county slate headed by D.S. Tucker for county judge. Seaburn S. Webb of Pleasant Grove was named head of the county committee. W.J. Bell was again nominated for state office, this time treasurer. He was joined by Dr. B.F. Bell of Tyler for Congress, Nat Hunt for state representative, 12th District, and W.T. Hanks of White House for the 13th District. This election, the socialist vote continued to climb, with Pleasant Grove going 43%. As a county, however, the result was still minimal, especially in the larger towns. W.J. Bell established a socialist reading room on the southwest corner of the square at 112 West Irwin. He wrote into the Appeal to Reason, "Readers of the Appeal and all others in the vicinity of Tyler who desire to acquire knowledge of socialism are invited to call at the Socialist Reading Room over the Wonder Store in Tyler, where a circulating library is installed and a dozen or more socialist and trade union papers are kept on file." In 1907 into 1908, itinerant socialist speakers blanketed Smith County. Flint, Campbell's Chapel at Copeland, Bascom, White House, Bullard, Macedonia, Sharon, Troup, and Tyler. One Democrat in the Sharon local, Pleasant Grove District, a precinct, took offense and, according to Secretary Bell, had repeatedly gone beyond all decency in his maneuvers, and recently he harassed our comrade, S.S. Webb, to the point where patience ceased to be a virtue and where to remain pacific would be at the cost of self-respect and manhood. The Secretary requested contribution to Webb's legal defense fund, the charge being assault with intent to kill. In March, J.C. Rhodes of El Paso, socialist lecturer and candidate for governor, advertised in the Tyler paper that he would speak twice at the courthouse and tell his audience, Why 10 million wage slaves go hungry in this land of the free, while politicians point with pride to our noteworthy prosperity. Why the workers of the world are producing fabulous wealth and living in rags, while the idlers who produce nothing sit in palaces wasting the products of the working class. Laura P. Payne, a 1906 candidate for Congress years before she could legally vote, came through in May, and William D. Big Bill Haywood, one of the founders of the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies, spoke to a large crowd in Tyler, many of them ladies, just before the Grand Saline encampment in August of 1908. The effect of all this talk became apparent in the November election. Pleasant Grove went over 50% socialist, followed by Copeland and White House. Tyler's vote was still minimal. By August of 1909, Smith County Socialists were confident enough to sponsor their own East Texas encampment to be held August 2nd through 7th at South Park Heights in Tyler, which is basically the Azalea District south of Shaw, including what is now Bergfeld Park. There was a large shady grove nearby set aside for the campers and their horses and mules. Abundant water for stock and drinking purposes was provided. The speaking area was set up on a natural incline. According to the Appeal to Reason, 3 of the comrades placed a banner advertising the encampment on the front of the state headquarters building, which was on West Irwin, and those on either side. The sign is 6.5 feet wide and 60 feet long, painted in the reddest red there is, and 3-foot letters. While the sign was being placed, the plutes began to howl. The druggist near has stated that he would commit suicide when socialism came. He, of course, had reason to feel bad. One greedy old landlord still says he is going to tear it down. At any rate, the whole town knows that it is there by this time, and it has done more good than several socialist speeches could have done. The committee has arranged for 1,000 of the large encampment posters. They also ran large streamers across the main streets in Tyler, Troup, and surrounding towns. They evidently had an advertisement painted on the side of a downtown building, which was uncovered when the People's Bank building expanded. I wish this photo had been in color. I have a feeling that it would have had a lot of red in it. Party organizers scheduled 3 lectures daily, morning, afternoon, and night. Preparations are being made to care for several hundred visitors, and the Cotton Belt has put on excursion rates from points as far south as Lufkin and north as far as Mount Pleasant. There's talk of running motor cars to the campgrounds. When the meeting started, there was nearly 1,000 people from all over East Texas in the camp. Hundreds of Tyler people drove out to the Heights to hear the speakers. Tom Aloysius Red Tom Hickey, Irish revolutionary, religious skeptic, anti-prohibitionist, former private secretary of Eugene V. Debs, and current editor of the socialist newspaper The Rebel in Hallettsville, kicked off the encampment with the waste of competition. According to him, too much money was spent on non-productive labor. 66% of all national taxation goes for Army, Navy, and pensions. He closed by saying, under competition, every child in a Texas cotton patch carries a soldier on one shoulder, a lawyer on the other, and a capitalist astraddle of its neck. The next day, the Dallas Morning News reporter stated, the 1,050 chairs under the elms at South Park Heights were all taken last night, and several hundred were standing when Mrs. Lena Morrow Lewis of San Francisco, national organizer of the Socialist Women, began her address on the woman question. The lady made a big hit, particularly with the ladies present. Redden Andrews took the stand next. He knew Tyler well because he had served as minister of First Baptist Church between 1880 and 1885, during which time a new church building was constructed. He resigned to become president of Baylor University when it moved from Independence to Waco. His background as a Confederate scout, cowboy, educator, preacher, writer, and former populist made him familiar and acceptable to Texans. He argued that the basis for Christianity and socialism were almost identical, part of the social gospel or Bible socialism movement that today might be called liberation theology, taken from Acts 2 and 4. He said, "The oppressed millions see the way of deliverance from the harsh and abnormal conditions of poverty and slavery. Socialism derives its life and nourishment from truth, justice, and humanity. It advocates not reform, but revolution, the substitution of a good in the place of a bad thing, the displacement of a competitive, capitalistic government by a cooperative commonwealth." These three spoke several times during the encampment, along with W. Buchanan and W. S. Noble, state organizers, and George A. Brewer, for years on the editorial staff of the Appeal to Reason. The attendance the first 4 days was large, but it was much smaller at the end of the week. It was successful enough, however, to encourage the local party to plan on making the encampment an annual event so that thousands would hear the message of socialism who might not ever hear an itinerant speaker. Plus, it gave party members an opportunity to touch elbows and brighten up with enthusiasm and renewed energy, which would stimulate them to redouble their efforts for socialism. As November of this non-election year rolled in, Mother Jones, labor and community organizer, another co-founder of the Wobblies, the most dangerous woman in America, spoke to a meeting in Troop, where, as Comrade Butler reported, some of the most prejudiced opponents of the movement there came to her at the close of the meeting and assured her that they were socialist henceforth and contributed liberally for the expense of the meeting. God bless Mother Jones. Her memory will be enshrined in the hearts of the people long after Taft, Roosevelt, and company are forgotten. Spring of 1910 brought renewed enthusiasm. The National Socialist Party had finally heard the rural, poor majority of Texas and had ceased to call for the collectivization of land. They would leave that up to Texas. Texas proposed an end to the sale of public lands, the reclamation of all leased lands, and any land held for exploitation and speculation. That is, more than a farmer could work himself with no hired hands or tenants. That'd be taxed to such an extent that the owner would be forced to sell on reasonable terms to tenants or forfeit the land to the state government. This was a compromise between the tenants' desire for family-based ownership and a more equitable distribution of land, but the party never addressed inheritance. It was enough to attract additional voters, making socialism the fastest-growing political movement in Texas. In Tyler, party members wrote, "Our backs are up and we are going to bring our cause to the attention of the Tyler people more forcibly than ever." They ran a full city ticket in the spring and published their local platform. They start with the party line, "The whole people shall acquire collective ownership of all machinery and other means of production and distribution of the necessities and luxuries of life, and that such production and distribution shall be administered democratically by the people, at cost of production through the collectivity." Then they move into, "In the meantime, while seeking the accomplishment of industrial democracy, it is our purpose to aid in the enactment of such laws and ordinances in state and city as will benefit the working class, and to that end we demand the enactment of the following into ordinances." Note number 2, free education of all children up to 21 years of age with compulsory education. Look at number 5, equal franchise to the sexes and equal reward for equal service rendered regardless of sex. Number 7, a free city hospital and public bathhouse at cost of maintenance. And then part of number 8, the creation of a public park in lieu of the horse lot on the public square. And number 10, I don't even see number 10 there. 10 is municipal ownership, construction, and operation of all public utilities at cost. Some of these things seem normal to us now, and some are still radical. It all made sense enough to the editor of the Tyler semi-weekly Courier-Times that he wrote, "If a man of ordinary sense and sympathies had never heard of a public party and was to meet a Republican, a Democrat, and a Socialist, and each were to explain to him fully the true doctrines of his party, we admit he might well lean toward the Socialist." W.J. Bell, no longer state party secretary, began publishing a bi-monthly newsletter called The Militant during the summer. Itinerant speakers continued to cycle through Lindale, Winona, Hickory Grove, Tyler, Flint, Bullard, and Troop. T.W. Woodrow spoke to a large audience from the bandstand on the courthouse square on August 12th. And again, the editor of the Tyler semi-weekly Courier-Times was impressed. Socialism is a live question, and people should read up on it before taking a stand. It is not nearly as bad as most people think. In fact, socialism is positively democratic. As now modified, socialism stands for man and his rights to dominate, where now property dominates the world. The second East Texas Socialist encampment came off at South Park Heights, August 22nd to 27th, 1910. Fred Warren, editor of the Appeal to Reason, was keynote speaker to a crowd of 4,000, followed by Redden Andrews, now Socialist candidate for governor, Mary O'Reilly, Red Tom Hickey, Woodrow, and others. The Smith County voters in November were able to select from a full national, state, and local roster of socialist candidates, including Mrs. Lou Griffin, who ran as a candidate for state representative 10 years before she would be able to vote for herself. Countywide, the socialist vote was up. Smith County was one of the top 10 socialist counties in the state. This was possibly due to Redden Andrews being local. Pleasant Grove went over 50% again, joined by Copeland, followed by White House at 26.5%. Statewide, Redden Andrews got over 25,000 votes, and while substantially less than what the Democratic Party got, the over 3,000 vote increase was encouraging. Its share in the 1910 vote was nearly a 500% increase over 1904. Since 1906, the Texas Socialist Party had more than doubled its gubernatorial total in each election. The 1911 was an off year for state and national elections. W.J. Bell ran for mayor and lost, even though Redden Andrews spoke on the courthouse square each night the week before the vote. The Socialist Party had very little success with the middle and upper-class town people who were doing quite well without it. Tyler sponsored no encampment that year. However, the rebel announced, "Local Tyler, Texas has opened the campaign of 1912 with a vim." Dr. B.F. Bell had written and was circulating a leaflet which said in part, "We need your help, but we don't need it unless you know that in this philosophy of life, there is no place for anyone with a bomb, a firearm, or any instrument of death. Our way is the way of intelligence, peace, and progress. Would such a system of life as I have poorly outlined help you? If so, study it and vote for it, and you will vote for socialism. What God gave to any, God gave to all." The East Texas encampment was brought back, managed by Dr. Bell, but moved to Hills Park and Natatorium, August 26th to 27th. That's about where the blood bank is now. They promised every convenience for camping and for enjoying a week of outing. All forms of amusement and entertainment are being provided. Speakers of state and national reputation will address the audience daily. The Dallas Morning News reported large crowds with campers from a half-dozen counties. Red Tom Hickey spoke on the Socialist Party's national platform, followed by Cornelius Foley of Pennsylvania and Dr. Red of Wichita, Kansas. Hickey came back the next morning with the solution of the land question in the South, and other orators were Dr. J.H. Greer, a Chicago medical professor, and J.A. Curry of San Antonio. This would be the last East Texas encampment in Tyler. The next would be at Sulphur Springs. All of the work paid off. In the 1912 gubernatorial election, Red and Andrews received 25,268 votes statewide, beating the Republican candidate. In Smith County, again, Pleasant Grove and Copeland went over 50%, but Holland, Bullard, Flint, Grange Hall, White House, and Oman all went over 20%. Socialists continued to hit the land question hard, particularly the bonus that some landlords required on top of the 1/3 of the cotton crop. And in the spring of 1914, a newcomer to Democratic politics took notice. James Farmer Jim, or Pa Ferguson, ran in the Democratic primary, pledged to protect land renters and sharecroppers with a new law enforcing customary rents and shares, no bonus. That was not enough for Smith County Socialists. Many in Overton, Mount Sylvan, Flint, Lindale, Oak Grove, Garden Valley, Troup, and Swan formed chapters of the Renters Union, pushing petitions to amend the state constitution to provide for a tax equal to the full rental value on all lands held for speculation, accepting homestead reservations only, to the end that use and occupancy shall become the sole title to land in Texas. Again, a full city and county ticket was presented, headed by Seaburn S. Webb for county judge. In November, Democrat James Ferguson won, wooing back some of the state's lukewarm socialists to the party of their fathers. The socialist E.R. Metzen still beat the Republican candidate. While socialist votes were down somewhat across the state, they hit an all-time high in Smith County at 22.8%. To what did the party attribute it? The three things that always made socialism grow: agitation, organization, and starvation. Something happened in 1915 that cracked the party's upward climb. Perhaps it started with the outbreak of World War I the previous year and Wilson's preparedness program. The Socialist Party was adamantly pacifist. In 1915, the United States Commission on Industrial Relations came to Dallas to hear testimony on rural unrest and the exploitation of landless farmers. Maybe that scared some folks. Red Tom Hickey continued to push the Texas Party toward the left with the rebel. This move was apparent in the Tyler platform that year. Take a particular look at a few of the planks. Number one, the city acquires and operates at cost street railroads, electricity, gas, water, sewer, savings and loan, drug stores, ice factory, coal and wood yard, slaughterhouse, market, dairy and creamery, jitney service for passengers and freight, bathhouse, hospital and sanitarium, truck gardens, theater, band and orchestra, children's park, and playground. Number two, employ idle at union wages to extend streetcar lines, to extend municipal telephone, light, power, gas, water, sewer, to grade and pave streets, to build and equip all of those services they're talking about in number one. Number three, the city is to build cottages to be rented or sold at cost on rental payments without interest to workers. Number four, hire school physicians and dentists for free exams and treatment exclusion of textbooks on history that teach a false patriotism and reverence for the butchers of war, past and present, as heroes. Discipline or dismissal of instructions that import to pupils an impression that it is right to take up arms and kill in war. Free education, supplies and medical attention, free food and clothing for needy students. I wonder how that pacifist part set with a community that reverenced its Confederate veterans as heroes. Number 11, creation of an Office of Public Defender and provision of free legal advice. Number 13, creation of an employment bureau. 15, 1 day of rest in 7 for policemen and all city employees. 16, sick, accident, or disability compensation and old age pensions for city employees, which would include, I guess, all of those working in that big list of things in number 1. Number 20, prohibition of child labor and the entering of messenger boys or other minors into houses of prostitution. Again, some of the provisions we now think fairly obvious, while others are still radical. That summer, Grand Saline held its last socialist encampment. In November, the party again presented a full local and state ticket. J.D. Goodwin ran for county judge, and Mrs. Lou Griffin ran for county superintendent of schools. On the state level, the Socialists lost their number 2 standing back to the Republicans, with some of the former Socialist voters probably supporting Farmer Jim Ferguson's reelection. In the county, the vote fell from 28.8% to 8% Socialist, but ever-faithful Pleasant Grove continued to go over 58% for the party, followed by Copeland. The rise and fall of the Socialist vote in Smith County is most dramatic in this graph. By mid-1917, the Socialist Party had disappeared from Smith County politics. The United States had entered World War I in that spring. In June, the Texas Socialist newspaper, The Rebel, had been suppressed by the federal government as being seditious. Red Tom Hickey had turned it almost entirely anti-war and anti-conscription, and he had been arrested for conspiring to abet draft resistance, although he was never indicted. Socialist newspapers were denied second-class postage and shut down. Developments in Russia may have had an impact. East Texas poor and tenant farmers who might be wavering had to choose between a Socialist Party that might be considered disloyal, that some called atheistic, and which at least on the national level supported racial equality, or Farmer Jim, Pa Ferguson, who declared himself one of them, an old-line, patriotic Southern Democrat who understood their problems and would work for them. It wasn't even a contest. Not everyone gave up without a fight. The party published a platform and promoted a state-level slate in 1918, but it got few votes. W.J. Bell, the Tyler piano tuner, with his equally socialist wife Lula, moved to Dallas, where they continued to write hot letters to the newspaper. They left behind their young son, Carl Marx Bell, in a grave here in Tyler at Liberty Hill. Some of the socialist proposals were quickly adopted by the local establishment. We soon had a park instead of a horse lot around the courthouse. We had city-owned water and sewer, a city-owned bandstand, and a city-sponsored band. Other proposals came with the New Deal and the War on Poverty, and some are being cussed and discussed now. But I suppose there's one question still hanging out there unspoken. Was my grandfather or great-grandfather a Smith County socialist? Here's a list of all the people who ran for office, or who were poll watchers, or who wrote into the Appeal to Reason, the Rebel, or the Tyler newspaper, identifying themselves as socialists. No secret McCarthy list. These folks were proud to take a stand for the poor farmers of East Texas. And this, quite a list for Smith County, now considered predominantly conservative Republican.